Hi there, John. This is John here, and my name is Steph. I am taking the beautiful opportunity to hold this space of this Freebird podcast today for the One Love Community Care, and really honored to be the person to be here to interview and to hear about all this incredible power of your story, John. So, John is in Sydney. He is a man who has been through a lot in his childhood and was able to move through it all in order to be a wonderful human being and parent himself, which is something that I think comes up for all of us, that in order to actually really drop in to being a responsible parent, we want to be able to have a deeper knowing within. So I'm so excited to hear a bit about your story, John. Would you share a bit about your story? It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, Steph. I really appreciate it. And my story, yeah, when I'm telling my story, I start with who am I telling my story to? Who are the people? What are the points that I need to touch on to make sure that this story can land? And I guess the best place to tell a story is usually from the start. And I'll start with where I was born, where I've come from, because that kind of sets the pace of my ancestral history. And then I'll move into my relationship stories of how I have had lots of failed relationships. And the reason I say I've had failed relationships is because from the onset, like I really wanted them to succeed. And
Mm.
then the rites of passage and the transition to go through that to come out the other side as a father and a husband with a successful business that shows people how to do what I've done to get to this point. So,
Oh, beautiful. So
yeah,
all of it is kind of surrounded by your story has created who you are today, to be able to take something that was a challenge and to make it into a treasure. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. And I feel like on the journey of to where I've got to, there's been lots of paths of what wisdom that I can use, what technologies I can use, like whether it's attachment theory or plant medicines or all the things to try and work out what was wrong with me. Like, why couldn't I have relationships? But it really took me back into the body and how important it is. The body can operate as a cage for the heart and a cage for the spirit and a cage for vitality, where it stops you from allowing the child that was suppressed to come through you, which nourishes all of your relationships. So I'll double back to the start. So I was born in England. I was originally a US citizen, and my mother is from the Caribbean, specifically the island of St. Vincent in the Grenadines. And my dad is from England. And my mum flew to England to do some education from St. Vincent. And that's where my parents met. And originally, my dad didn't want to have kids, and my mum was barren. So the doctors told her that she couldn't have children. So my parents were operating out of that program. Like, we can't have kids. So, surprise, surprise, I was conceived.
A
And
miracle then. Even that story appears to be a bit of a miracle of how we think it's going to be one way and we live from a story and even choose a partner from that story that will keep us from having a child, and then here you are.
exactly, absolutely. And I'm the eldest of five, by the way. So they kept on going.
Right.
Um, and in that, um, me acknowledging that and initially my dad didn't want to be a father, and my mother was unsure about whether or not she could become a mother. And as I aged, these themes kept playing out where my dad was still hadn't dealt with his own grief and responsibility of becoming a father. So he
Mm.
became a father four more times. And then my mother and how she explains it to me was that the biology just took over, and she loved being a mother and she wanted to stay a mother, which is what's playing out now with my wife, is that she didn't know what she wanted to do. She was stressed about what's my purpose, what I'm here to do, what's the job I'm going to have. And then as soon as she became pregnant with my son Luca, she loved being a mother. She's like, John, she said to me, John, this is what I want to do. I want to be a mother. I want to take care of the house. I want to take care of my son. And we'd love to have a number two. So we're planning on having a number two. But doubling back to the start again, We immigrated out of England to Australia because my dad could see that Australia was the lucky country and you can make something of yourself here and the weather's much better. Like England, pure rain, a little bit
Mhm.
grey, bit
That's
frosty.
that's for sure. Caribbean wife wants some sun, right?
Exactly right. So originally, Mum didn't want to come because of she had all her family was in England. They all immigrated out. But my dad said, "No, let's come to Australia," and his brother was already out here making his own fortune and doing whatever he wanted to do. So we moved out to Australia, and my dad had a vision of starting his own permaculture farm, living off the land, really feeling connected into the land. And that has been a reoccurring dream for him to try and acknowledge and do. And only this year in his 70s, he's started to acknowledge and step forward into that dream. He bought some property up north. He's actually now stepping into that. But for us as a family, and me being the eldest of five, that was the reoccurring theme for all of us, that we were going to live off the land. Dad was going to buy his dream property, and we're all going to live together in just living off the land with nature. So in this journey, I've had, like I've mentioned, eldest of five, so four siblings. My younger brother, when he was in his mid-teens, ended up getting leukemia, acute myeloid leukemia, and that pushed the family through a bit of a dark night of the soul in regards to what's the purpose of life. Really brings the relationship with death to the forefront.
Oh yeah. Wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And you
big
were in
time.
Australia then, and you had already four brothers and sisters, or
We had, I had Yeah, I had. Yeah, it was all the sisters. So he got leukemia in his teens, and we already had all five of us. All five of us were in play on the field, and so he went through the cycles of chemo, and as a last resort, it just so happened that my youngest sister got born, and she was a bone marrow match for him, and everyone else in the family was not a bone marrow match. And while I got my blood tested, I fainted. The first time I've ever fainted in my life was when I had my blood tested. That was hilarious. My mum thought it was hilarious because I fell off the chair.
Mhm.
Um, but in that, my sister effectively saved my brother's life. And he's in remission right now. He's living his own life too. But that was a real dark night of the soul for our family system. And the struggle of being able to see that my mum and dad couldn't deal with crisis. My mum and dad, all the relationship issues that had accrued up until that point just really came to the forefront. They couldn't communicate, they couldn't fight. There was more fighting than loving. Right? There was more distance. And being the eldest of five and um, having siblings to contend to, nurturing wise, I became someone who was quite rigid, self contained, hyper independent, and just did my own thing. So being close and intimate with people was a little bit scary. It was, well, what's intimacy really all about? What's what in my relationship, my family model, just seeing my parents not really being affectionate, not really seeing them come together after a fight. Like they would have a fight and then they would just go into their separate areas of the house or pretend that nothing happened, or things would get thrown and then there would be no repair. And
Yeah.
that's how we were treated as kids, right? Hey, do you want to say something, Steph?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, like, what do you believe that instilled in your beliefs about parenting? Because you said at that point, you're like, well, what is intimacy? Well, this is how parents are. So what was, as your childhood experience that you're explaining really beautifully and vulnerably? So thank you so much for the shares. Um, would you be able to expand on how you feel that affected your shaping of your beliefs around parenting and relate?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd love to. And thank you for the invitation for that to go a little bit deeper. It shaped my experience of parenting where parents don't function as a unit. So you have two people with competing opinions and everyone's just battling for dominance and supremacy. And then emotional landscape wise, emotions aren't important. So what your emotional reality is invalid compared to whatever the logic is. And my dad being an emotionally closed person, and mum being very emotional and not being able, it's like oil and water. So my relationship experience and my modeling was emotions are bad because they don't get you anywhere, and logic is good. Therefore, always obey logic, and that you'll and it'll always be fine. You'll always be fine.
So you're
That's
pretty
kind of,
much to your father's way. You thought your father was
I thought
a
my father's way was the correct way,
correct.
um,
Uh,
until all of my relationships started failing.
right, right.
Right?
Yeah. So then emotions started rising up. And so were you able to, how are you with your own emotions at that time as a teenager and a kid?
Yeah, great question. So a lot of my emotions were suppressed and repressed. And I would use food and gaming in particular. I spent a lot of time gaming, like hours, thousands of hours gaming. I was really good at it. And then all of my siblings would game as well. So we would all game together, and that was our bond. We would play Pokemon and GoldenEye on the N64 and SNES, and then when we got our own computers, we'd do online gaming. So gaming was our bond, but outside of that, there wasn't really any real emotional intimacy. Emotions were wrong. So
So all of you kind of followed suit to be more like your father. And how was your mother in that space? How did she experience the mothering besides being with your father? Because kids cry. I'm a mother myself. I have a 7-year-old. And, when kids are upset or they have emotions, how is she mothering you rather than connected to your father?
yeah, great question. So I'm of the eldest of five. I've got two brothers and two sisters. So all the girls, my two sisters, emotional beings, and felt invalidated both by mum and dad.
Mm.
And then for me, how I dealt with my emotions or how we were nurtured by mum is it was more about food, getting food, and that was mostly a lot of the attention was through food or gifts or um, what I know now in my journey was that we missed out on the nurturing of presence and the safety. So because my mum felt unsafe with my relationship with dad, with her in her relationship with dad, with my father, there wasn't the emotional space to take care of us deeply, especially when we started having opinions of our own. So as a baby, it was fine,
Yeah.
but once you start hitting that toddler age, the
Mhm.
tension built. What do you want to ask, Stephanie? Steph?
I was just curious. So where is the turning point for you where you realized that you could create a different type of family system than what you grew up with? Like knowing that you said, "Oh, I was missing the nurturing," knowing that you had missed that and didn't even realize that you said until your relationships. But what was this turning point for you where you're like, "Oh, actually, I can create something totally different, totally."
Yeah, great question. The turning point came after I happened across a mentor who showed me how trauma is held in the body, specifically how injuries incurred in childhood affect your posture, how you move, how you speak, and how you operate in the world, the relationship with yourself. But it shows up in your physical appearance. And he took me through various fatherhood injuries and motherhood injuries. And my last injury that he helped me repair, which was the fatherhood injury, I could really feel myself becoming a father. I actually went to his house and did a process around it. And I told him, I'm ready to be a dad. Like, I didn't think I'd ever be ready to be a dad, but I'm actually ready to be a dad. And that was a huge epiphany for me after the years of not wanting to be a father and just wanted to be in a relationship. And the other turning point was when I met my wife, my wife, and seeing that, oh, there's a woman here that actually she adores me and she respects me, and I've done enough work on myself to respect her and what it means to be a mother. Like from the way my dad saw women in relationships is that you always have to be contributing. You have to be doing something. You always have to be you have to be taking care of the house. You have to be cooking the meals. You have to be doing this. And the way I see it was that if I can nourish and nurture what it means to carry a child and be a mother and hold that at the highest regard, then everything else falls into place. And it did. So knowing that being a mother is enough, and she didn't need to get a job, she didn't need to find a purpose, she didn't need to go and do whatever it is that she wanted to do. That was a key turning point for me when I learned how to deeply respect women.
Mm. Wow, that's beautiful. So to be able to support her in that way. And can you tell us more about the fears or challenges you faced around fatherhood, like before that actuality? Because that sounds like, trauma-informed spaces are so powerful. Myself as a trauma-informed facilitator, as well as, with One Love Community Care, everything is very focused on that, on the trauma-informed spaces. So once you start to realize the trauma that's being carried in your bodies, when you spoke about that, I was just like, yes, yes, yes. This is so true. If the more of us could understand, yet once we see it, it's not just about seeing it, it's about feeling it, it's about healing it, all of that. So I'm just curious if it was like there's a really fast turning point, like it sounds like you said, or, okay, oh, I can do this, I can shift it, or if you went through any types of journeying that helped you to get through to the other side of, what was that journey like, that act.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So one of the key journeys, that it was a journey, definitely a journey. Like I've had multiples of relationships before the one I have now that have iterated my own personal belief and growth. One of the really pivotal relationships was one where I became a full-time carer for about 3 years. A full-time carer. I quit my 9 to 5 job, and successful 9 to 5 job, and quit to take care of my partner at the time, who had uh, chronic fatigue syndrome, myalgic encephalomyelitis, and fibromyalgia, and a whole bunch of complex, like CIRS, really complex symptom pictures. And so that relationship really brought to the forefront what government support looked like. We couldn't get her on the DSP, we couldn't get her on the NDIS when we first got together. So it was the journey of taking her to get a diagnosis that could get her government support. And then the NDIS had just started. So there were had teething problems on, well, what's a condition? What fits a long-term condition? So that whole process humbled me, Steph, in such a big way, because I had all this judgment over people that were unwell, and you can just think your way through it. But when I saw that this woman that I was in love with
Mm.
couldn't couldn't get her body to do what it needed to do, and I went to doctor's appointments with her to see um, what if the doctors could help, and the way doctors would treat her, because she appeared altogether. And these are invisible illnesses, and you might have some people in your community that have these invisible illnesses. And knowing that the doctors, just because they couldn't see it on a test, it meant that it wasn't happening in her world, but her world was her world. So in that relationship, actually, I met my mentor that showed me the body through that connection, and I
Mm.
would not have found him any other way. Um, so in that, the journey has been, I'm going to commit to this woman, I'm going to commit to this relationship, and then realizing I just didn't have the skills. I did not have the skills to be able to make it work. But in your previous question about my journey of becoming a father and the
Yeah.
pressures involved in being a father, was the provider piece. Now, my modeling from my dad was that being a father is a burden, children are a burden, making money is a burden, and then all this backlog of resentment that he didn't want to deal with. So me, I needed to turn that into something, well, I'm going to step into this wholeheartedly. I'm going to put my heart first into this. I will not have my children or anybody else in my life feel like they're a resentment of mine. I want to do this for the love and the joy and the commitment and the devotion of it. So when I discovered what devotion felt like for me, which required a number of humblings,
Absolutely.
everything really started to shift for me. Relationships, even my sibling relationship with my siblings improved. My relationships with my parents improved. Just it just ripples through my entire family system and my communities.
Wow, that's really beautiful. And it's true. Once something shifts, everything starts to shift with it. Um, that's really beautiful. So this the woman who you were speaking about who had this invisible sickness, and it was going on in her world. How did you end up supporting her towards with that if the doctors weren't able to find out what was going on? And what was the journey with that for you?
Yeah, well, great question. Yeah,
There's
so
out here too, just being like, you can also be having these types of sicknesses and feel like you're never gonna get out of it, or no one's gonna love you, or no one's gonna want you to have to go to those places with you. So this is a really beautiful piece around the devotion, it sounds like, yeah.
yeah, it is. Yeah, totally. Thank you. And when we first got together, she had mild symptom pictures, and I didn't take it seriously. I just thought, oh, it's all, she'll just get through. She'll be fine. But because our relationship was not healthy, there's lots of on again, off again, push pull, wearing on her nervous system, and how I supported her in some was initially a bit financially, but I was doing it very resentfully. Again, not in my state that I'm in now, and so I would carry her to and from her bed. I would take her in a wheelchair. The wheelchair that we needed, it needed to be because she also had a diagnosis of postural orthostatic tachycardia, or POTS syndrome. She couldn't sit up. So we needed to lay her down wherever she moved. So I'd carry her from the car to the wheelchair, carry her into doctor's offices. The first house that we stayed at, after we thought we needed this like a break and a vacation, there was 62 stairs that I'd put her on my back and carry her up and down the stairs. And I did that for a number of weeks.
Wow.
She was light, but that's what I did. I was just that was my commitment to making things work, was I'll do this.
Yeah.
Um, I would cook for her. I helped her move houses multiple times, because we moved to Byron Bay in the northern rivers to try and find some therapy that was going to help her. So we were cycling between Airbnbs every couple of weeks. So I had packed up most of our stuff in a trailer in a car, and we'd cart it around. I also took care of a cat that came with her as well. So her companion cat, who was more loyal to her than I was, purely because of my own trauma. So from the outlook, I stayed with her for a long time out of guilt. And being able to leave that relationship was particularly hard because it needed for me to fall on my sword, and hard for her too, because I made promises that we were going to be together. But when I could see that this was not what I really wanted, being able to put an end to that was challenging for me. And I can still feel the grief right now, around saying something and committing to something, but then needing to leave because it was going to make me ill. I saw a number of therapists and the NDIS workers who were supporting us. When we eventually got on the NDIS, we did eventually get there, and on the DSP.
Mm.
The support workers were saying, John, you need to leave this because you're compassion fatigue, and you're wearing yourself out, and you're not going to survive this. So it's either one of you is on the healing path, or both of you end up in some kind of chronic healing path.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, beautiful. And thank you for sharing. And I know that you mentioned before to me about sharing your story that it's both terrifying and liberating. So I'm just curious about that, like that even just what you've shared now or so far, but just to give other people also the courage to come out and share their stories. So how do you overcome that fear of being both vulnerable and sharing so openly as you have done with us?
Thank you. Lots of practice. So whenever you get an opportunity to share your story, you do. Um, in my work with the five personality patterns, there's certain trauma cycles that are particularly adept at sharing their stories. Others who are a little bit more reserved and pull back, or are afraid to get it wrong, or want to get it right, or get too obsessed over details, or don't know how to be present and grounded in their body, can flounder in their story, and only get better with practice. You've got to retrain the body that who you are and how you've become is part of your story. And your story is really important. Like, it unlocks people. It helps them feel more connected to humanity and community, and that you're not so alone. And it's through practice, Steph, and knowing that my voice has something to share, especially the feedback when someone tells me, "Oh, John, when you shared that thing, oh, it unlocked something in my body. Like it just felt, I felt you, I felt this, I felt all these memories come back. So I think every if you can hold in an intention that everybody's helping each other guide them home to themselves through
Mm.
story time's the best time.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's beautiful. There is a lot of power in the story. So you just mentioned a little bit about the five personality patterns, right? And I know that you've spoken a bit about that and about how you have this thriving business that you've come to after moving through all your journey, right? Um, so could you explain a bit the new five personality patterns and how they help people to transcend survival patterns and how you guide people in releasing their emotional blockages?
Yeah, sure, I'd love to. So the five personality patterns, the new five personality patterns, this is not related to the big five personality patterns. This is different, and it's different to DISC and Enneagram and a lot of those other personality tests. It's a technology that's was designed by Wilhelm Reich, and he's someone who invented orgone and original methods of psychiatry and psychotherapy. He saw that in his treatments that people would exhibit specific body shapes and body patterns. And those all had their own safety strategies to deal with overwhelm or being triggered effectively. So within the five personality patterns, there's the leaving type, there's emerging type,
So what
there's
was the first one?
leaving type, leaving.
So give a little synopsis. So leaving, the person who just wants to leave whenever anything comes up.
Sure, yeah. So the leaving type, the injuries installed usually in utero and maybe about the first year after life, where they learn how to disassociate and they can leave their body. They're also highly gifted at channeling things and bringing in things from behind the veil and speaking from those places. They're also highly adept at psychic abilities, and they can also be categorized as like a highly sensitive person. And for that person, their struggle is being able to ground themselves in their body.
Okay,
Um,
beautiful. Yeah.
yeah. Then the next one is the merging. And the merging is missed out on the nurturing from the mother, whether the mother was unsupported or just wasn't in a place to fully nurture the child. And they're longing for connection. And they're very gifted at empathy, hyper gifted at empathy. And for them to learn what it means to be them and unlock their core self, access their core self, it's learning boundaries and what is their self-referencing versus referencing somebody else. They're the most afraid at hurting somebody else's feelings, so they're going to kind of hold their voice back. They kind of hold back. The third type is the endurer, and this is the toddler stage where usually the caregiver will try and oppress, suppress, and repress the child, suppress and repress the child from exhibiting their willpower. And these people learn how to hunker down and be super resilient, like really resilient. What tends to show up in their armoring, in their body armoring, is excess adipose tissue, where they try and buffer themselves from the world. Then the fourth pattern is known as the aggressive pattern. And this person tends to be your high level executive later in life. They're the ones that dominate people. Like Donald Trump is a really good example of this. He's an aggressive type in the five personality patterns. And they're
Mhm.
really looking for safety. They don't know how to find safety. So they try and dominate people in order to find their safety. But ultimately, they just end up being betrayed and left alone because their domination pushes people away. The fifth pattern is the rigid. And a lot of people who are successful business people and who work in finance or who love systems, like love systems, are rigid people. And they're the ones that tend to have a heart and pelvic split. So they can't really connect to both their heart and pelvis at the same time. They might pendulum between partners who are really loving and giving, and then another partner that they feel really attracted to sexually. So it pendulums between the two. And they're also the ones that have a disconnection with their core self. They have a mask on at the front. And then to get through that mask, they've got to acknowledge that they are really deeply lovable at the core.
Mm, okay. Wow. Beautiful. So those are the five personality types. And what do you think everyone is one, or do they change over their lifetime? And how do you like, are there questions to test for this, or is it just this inner knowing that's like, oh yeah, that's me?
No, there's all of the above. There's questions to test, and when you're born, you have a kind of even mix of all five. And then as you age and as your parents and your environment influences your levels of survival, two patterns will emerge as your most dominant, and then you kind of cycle between the two. And then when you start to go deeper into them and you expose how they're operating as a survival pattern, the other three can pop up, and they all work in conjunction to keep you alive, Steph. And keeping you alive can be um, the actions of keeping you alive can be introduced by maybe you're running out of money, maybe you're in a relationship that feels unstable, maybe you need to move house, maybe something there's a something political is about to change, or even over the lockdowns. All of these survival patterns would have come up where we're unsure about the future or the present moment, and our overwhelm will appear. So survival patterns will just appear to keep us alive.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. So what would you give for advice to people who want to create a more meaningful, relationship, but are blocked by past traumas or fears or these types of parts of their personality types that have come from ancient times of their lifetime that they can't really shift or change easily? What
Mm.
do you have for them?
Yeah, great question. What I would offer them is know that you're allowed to be in this place where you're at right now, and that when you create from a place of fear, that you will keep sowing the seeds of that same fear in the future. So learning how to be fearless within inside yourself, and specifically using the five personality patterns, is that there is online tests that you can do. There's a book that you can buy. It's very simple. And have a look at where in those five personality patterns that you feel like your survival patterns are showing up. And know that there's hope, because the body keeps the score, and the five personality patterns can help you read the score and write the song that your bird wants to sing. It really
Mm.
writes the correct song for you and what you want to create. So to uncage your heart in that requires understanding, bringing awareness to it. And there's also tools in those books, or that book, that will help you discern when you're surviving and when you're thriving.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, yeah, well, like hopefully some people who are watching here, those who are catching this later, are able to actually drop in and look that up, the five new personality patterns. Yeah, it's beautiful. Mm. So when you started to realize this, how do you feel like it shifted you into seeing, was it first for seeing that partner of yours, and then you saw it within you, your personality patterns? Or how did that come about and make the shifts in your life that, like, it sounds like this relationship and some of the relationships were a big part of your understandings of yourself, that you wanted to be there for that woman, but it was a lot of nurturing you were giving her, and even a lot of guilt that you were carrying inside of that, and recreating in that way what you feel like your father might have felt about you. So, how did you begin that process of healing the mother-father wounding that affected your self-worth and your relationships? Yeah, if you could give us a little bit more about your story with that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'd love to, Steph. Thank you. Yeah, it required going into events in my past, from conversations with parents and doing specific bodily exercises that would invite these patterns to the surface. So in the deeper side of the five personality patterns, we do body psychotherapy, which is where we articulate the body and do massage, and it will bring up these primal emotions that need to be expressed, from tantruming to screaming to hitting to a whole assortment of primal emotions that need to exist, that allow more feelings to come through. So specifically for me, it was looking at the part of me that I built up armor around to hide my heart. So literally a physical cage, my chest had a lot of armor around it on the front, so I couldn't give love freely. and I had armoring around the back, around my spine, around the back of my heart. So I couldn't receive any love. And me being someone who couldn't really give or receive love authentically, I was walking around like a tin man. So my mentor and the people that I was working with helped work on my body. Like we'd all do body work on each other. And then we'd do specific bodily exercises to reinvigorate this vitality in our body, and then use that to discharge all the emotional blocks, like shake it out, like tremble it out, which involve lots of screaming, yelling, and a lot of grief. Steph, I've cried a lot of tears in front of other people. So that's a big part of being able to be honest and open and just allow it all to flow. And then the next part that pushed me into the trajectory of my life is my business. So once relationships, I'm pretty good. I feel like I've got a pretty good hand on my relationships. The next faculty and portal for growth was through my business.
All right. Do you want to expand on a bit of that for yourself?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'd love that. And for those that are listening who feel like relationships they've got and now business is the next trajectory for them, learning it all again. So coming back to the bottom of the rung and being like, oh, okay, all right, I might have these amazing abilities and this amazing gift that I want to put into the world, but how do I actually run a business? What are the metrics that I need? Who are the people that I want to work with, and both looking at it from an energetic point of view as well as a practical point of view. So what does my ideal client feel like to be with? What's the price point that I want to work with? Do I want to work with people pro bono, which I do? Do I want to work with someone who's well financially invested in themselves and just can't seem to get their relationships to work? So for me, it was learning about how to be rejected again, learning how to be rejected from people that don't want to work with me, learning how to put an offer out there that might not land on anyone, learning how to give somebody a refund if they weren't getting the breakthrough that they wanted, learning how to pre-qualify people. It's like dating. Like you learn
Yeah.
how to choose your clients. I was like, I'm dating you right now, and I'm working out whether or not I actually want to work with you. So it's the two-way street. So that's been my next step into business, and also the money piece, and learning how what's a sensible rate to charge based on my own gifts and my own value versus what the market's going to demand and what the market could afford. So learning how to do all of that balancing has been uh, the next leg of associating my relationship journey with the relationship of my business.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So that sounds great. And it sounds like you've got your handle on that. And you're saying that a lot of it had to do with relations and relationships. So it feels like that's the common thread here is how do you create a better relationship with those, not just your partner, but your parents, your children, and your workspace. And they all have such deep intricacies. Yeah.
Totally.
Um, I'm getting a sign on my computer that I need to plug it in. I'm going to invite you to share a bit more around the family system and around the family system that you were able to move through that into your own, and anything else that brought you there that you think will really help people while I just run and grab my
Yeah,
portable.
please go and do that. Yeah, I've got this. I'll see when you come back with the charger. So what showed up for me there was looking at my family system in constellations. So family constellations for me has been a really useful mechanism that I use with my clients and for myself to see what's actually going on in my family of origin dynamic, what hidden dynamics were showing up in my family of origin dynamic. And if you're someone who's new to family constellations, they really need to be explored for yourself. It's an experiential psychodrama, is what it's called, psychodrama, where you're fulfilling a role or somebody else is fulfilling a role of a family member. Then you feel this. You feel that, for example, say there was a family secret being kept, and in the constellation somebody would represent that family secret, And then me witnessing these constellation, my own personal constellation happening, I'd feel all this energy that was going on in the constellation, knowing that, oh, I don't know what this secret is, but I can feel this in my body. Like it feels heavy, like it feels like I want to cry. And then introducing other elements into the constellation, to feel what needed to be felt. And so family constellations for me was a big deal in working out what was going on in my family system. So much so that after I'd do these constellations, that I'd get text messages from family. So the whole field would shift, and there would be like love or compassion or a desire for union in the family unit. But I hadn't done anything other than just witness and feel this, what was going on in this constellation. So for anyone that has an opportunity to do family constellations, I recommend, or subsets of those, because there's different styles of constellations. I recommend like doing that. Like it's the perfect way to not have a conversation with a family member that you feel like you're never going to be able to get through to, and just seeing what the underlying resentment or anger or secrets that are being held in the family unit just need to be exposed and felt, and yeah, expressed.
Wow. That's a beautiful share. And for me as well, I'm someone who I do a lot with work with family constellations, and the power of it is out of this world. It's one of these aspects with a lot of different types of healing. I really agree with you, where family constellations, shamanic realms, whether it's in this world or out of this world, the things that happen there can really shift what's happening here. And, it's this matter of this reminder, like you said, you've done your work. Now you're ready to find someone who's done their work too. And this is the aspect of like, if something isn't happening in your life, right, for all of our listeners out there and for ourselves as well, then how do we actually shift that? How do we shift that? Right? So you were able to shift so much, and so many of our listeners here are ready for that shift. So family constellations is something I would also really, really recommend. Any somatic practices, any ways where we can see our story from outside of the story, which is what constellations gives you that opportunity.
Mm.
Um, yeah, like so many people report very similar things, that they got a call from their mother a few days later and she was not the way she usually is, and she was much more kind or generous. And yeah, it's beautiful.
Mm.
Mm. And what about like this fear of becoming a parent? Because I feel like it's quite natural for just about anyone. Like even before I knew I wanted to be a mom, but becoming a mom was a whole different thing. So from both aspects, from someone who's just, wanting to be a mom, but a bit afraid when the actual thing happens, when you're actually pregnant. Like what would you say to people who fear that they won't live up to the expectations of being a great parent, just like you had, like this, like, to offer them, like whether or not there's something true from their childhood or not, that this can come up. Expectations can be about, that you had a parent that was so horrible or not nurturing like you had, or it could be the opposite, where you had such a nurturing, wonderful mother or parent that you don't know if you can do that. You have a different life, you have a different mission. How can I balance all these things? Yeah. So if you could offer some advice around that and moving out of that fear.
Yeah, great question. So yeah, like what, first of all, it requires being able to feel everything that you felt from your childhood for the most part. And some of it will come up in relationship. But knowing that, for me personally, it's knowing that I could mess up my son at some level, like being able to let go that I'm going to be the perfect father. I'm going to do all the things. I'm going to say exactly the right things to my son so he never gets traumatized or has some kind of injury that he needs to deal with, some kind of timeline therapy or shadow work or dream work or a family constellation. Just letting it go and knowing that my authentic self will just naturally sculpt who he becomes as a man. And also knowing that we're always still learning, like the obsession I found with, oh, I'm not going to be a great father or I'm going to mess this up, really taints and puts a fear into my communication with my son. So knowing that if I communicate from a core self and also holding my core self lightly, that I can make mistakes. And if when
Absolutely.
And when he learns how to speak to me and say, Dad, I don't like it. I never liked it how you did that to me. It's like, oh, wow, son, I had no idea. Thank you so much. Like that, you must have felt so alienated by that. It's, yeah, Dad, I really did. I really did. And I hate you for that. So, yeah, okay, I hear that. Thank you. I'll receive that. Just being able to take full responsibility for the emotional landscape of your children until they're ready to do it for themselves. I think that journey doesn't stop. But I think the pro tip would be that if you're already listening to podcasts and content like this, you're on the correct trajectory to reworking how you want to parent, how you want to create the next generation, for them to live an enriched life or create a life that money can't buy, where it's all about the connection and the authenticity. And then, your children will reflect that back to you, or every step of the way, right? Whatever willpower exertion or thing that they break, they'll remind you to not take life so seriously. And I think if a parent can learn to not take life so seriously, it creates a relaxed atmosphere in the family of origin and the family unit, where you can pivot much faster between crisis and excitement or exhilaration.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Hmm. Yeah. Thank you for that. Um, how about any challenges that really came up even in the journey of healing? Because it's not always a walk in the park. It's a matter of, like seeing those things that come up. And as
Mm.
you said, like some of those therapies are really great. I hope those who are listening are aware of the therapies that are out there. But yeah, just being on autopilot and not being present and continuing the same thing versus getting the help and allowing those challenges and dark nights of the soul to come up just because you're doing the work. That's also a big part of it. So yeah, I just love to hear about your personal experience with any challenges along the road.
Yeah, thank you, Steph. Yeah, the biggest challenge that's popping up right now was when I was refusing to buy or hire a business mentor. And before that point, I'd spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on like going overseas and sitting plant medicines and learning all the modalities that I have today. And I'd sold my unit that I bought when I was in 9 to 5, my corporate job. I was able to buy a unit and I sold that. And I was down to like my last few $1,000s. And and Cassie was pregnant. So the baby was on its way. We were living in a share house of 7 people and we needed to move out. And this pressure of I need to make a move. I can't keep watching like free YouTube videos. And so I need someone to actually look at me and audit my business and tell me what am I doing wrong. And that was a huge leap of faith for me, Steph, because I had a week's worth of rent left, no clients coming in the door. And this guy, my mentor, said, Cool, John, I hear you've only got 2 grand left. I'll take 1,500 of that. And then I'll sign you up to my $15,000 package. I think that's what we was priced at that point in time. And when we'll turn your business around. And he did. And he did. But that leap of faith, Steph, poor, I tell you, if I told my mum or my dad that, they wouldn't believe me. They'd be like, John, what did you do that for? How did you lose so much money? It's just like, that's the step. I think there's a leap of faith that after you've done all this work and all the academics and all the intellectualizing, you need to take the leap of faith and trust that if you're aligned with this next leap of faith, the universe will cradle you into the next cycle of wherever you go.
Yeah, well, that's beautiful. And that's something that I feel like a lot of us can understand and feel, that it feels like you've got nothing. You can't live and have $500 left. But if we look at this real life story of John, who was there with his pregnant wife and, had $500 left in the bank, but decided to still do this, that's the turnaround. That's the moment of, when you can really trust it. Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. Hmm. Yeah. So what did that feel like, that being in that space of a leap of faith with nothing left and trusting? How did you feel then? Did you have to convince your wife then, or was she trusting as well?
No, I just did it. I just did it. So for me, and knowing what I know about trauma and stress, just me holding it. So me involving her in the process, she didn't need to hear that in her second trimester. like I paid someone to help hold all that for me.
Mhm.
So my business coach, very skilled at like trained in the spiral and very skilled at trauma therapy as well and NLP, just took me through all my emotions. And I needed that loving hand. So it wasn't just the pragmatic structure of the business. I needed someone who was multi-skilled in being able to take me through my trauma and not just like write it off as, oh, they're just feelings. No, the feelings have power, they have weight, they have vitality, they have strength that you can use to slingshot you into something else. But in the moment, it was terrifying. When I signed over my credit card details, that was scary, Steph. That was scary. But then once I got that first client, I knew. I got my return on investment with under a month. That I knew that that was exactly what I needed to do.
Beautiful. Yeah. So what do you feel like is the biggest change of who you are now versus who you were back then before all these shifts and changes?
Ooh, great question. Like for me, I've got Pluto in the first house, so identity changes is like it's forever. Um, but the biggest one most recently is being able to tease apart what self-confidence is versus pride.
Mhm.
And the rigid part of me would use pride as a shield to not allow people to get close or me to be vulnerable. And then, like, I just confuse self confidence with pride. So, knowing that self confidence isn't an internal thing that comes from the heart, and pride is this other thing which we put out in front of us to be better than or self-righteous or whatever it is that I'm iterating at the moment to know what, oh, that's pride again. I can feel that. That's pride. Oh no, this is self, let's pull it back a bit. That's more self-confidence. So making the iterations, excuse me, the iterations in my feeling and sensing body, that's been the biggest change for me right now.
Beautiful, beautiful. And so what would you say for people who have issues with self-worth, which is usually where many people can be, who are moving through mental health challenges. What would you say about those two aspects and their own issues with self-worth?
Yeah, thank you. So finding someone or a group of people to take you through your low self-worth is really important. So what I was initially doing was trying to bolster my self-worth by like affirmations and other things and self-love. But what I really needed to be taken through, which I was my self-hatred and the part of me that really did not like myself, like my inner critic, that voice, really being able to externalize those parts of me and know that that voice will come up in other areas of your life until you love it back into yourself, by giving it a voice, knowing that it exists there and it's probably a parent or a teacher or a father figure or some internal family thing that's there that's really reminding you that you're not worthy, that you're not worthy to have an amazing life, not worthy to have an amazing relationship. So, in that, when you find the voices that complement your self worth, that are your inner cheerleaders, which you find going through those shadowy places, then your life shifts almost overnight. That when you really turn the volume up on those voices.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would even say it could be a great practice for anyone, those listening right now, or, those catching the replay to just take even a notepad and a pen and to write down some of those beautiful things about yourself that you may hear from your loved ones, your guides. Yeah, just in the same way, writing yourself a little love letter, writing yourself these aspects that are so important for you to have for those days when you feel a bit down. Yeah.
Absolutely, Steph. Yeah, great tip. Yeah.
Beautiful. So, we're going to be closing up soon. Is there anything that you feel you would like to share before we start to close the space? Anything
Yeah.
you want to clear out
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
yourself or?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, it's. I think everybody's going through a very deep transformation right now at a global level, and I think it's really important for people to reach out for help. And it doesn't have to be me. It can be anybody in your field. There might be somebody that you're resisting to hold out and reach out to help to. Just know that those conversations are an act of faith that I need help, or can you show me something, or hey, I've been struggling with this, can really shift the needle on creating like a free bird life. Like I think it really does make a difference when you can sing your song to someone that really wants to listen. It makes a difference.
Absolutely. Mm, wow. Thank you for that. Well, it has been such an honor, such a pleasure to have you here in the Freebird podcast. Really happy to hear your story. It's inspiring. It really, I feel like those who are listening out there are going to get a lot from it. And it sounds like you have turned your life around in such a way that it's impossible not to see that, people wouldn't have ever expected you to have the childhood that you had. And that's a big part of the remembrance around healing too, is that what you see in front of you, we have no idea what every strong person, every, successful person has been through. Yeah.
Thank you, Steph. It's a pleasure to be
Mm.
here.
Yeah, wonderful. So thank you, John. If anyone's wanting to reach out to you, we can find John. How can we find you?
You can find me on the socials on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all the usuals. Just look up John Kai Wallis, and you'll find me.
John Kai Wallis, thank you so much today. And always feel free to drop in with Freebird. If you're wanting to share your story, let us know. And as far as One Love Community Care, we're always here for you. Feel free to reach out, send us a message or a phone call. And if anything is ever coming up, know that you are supported. You have this tribe. You have that space, even if you feel like you don't have it in your physical world around you. Just to the listeners out there, that we're only a phone call or a message typed away. And really, really happy to be able to offer these spaces. So thank you so much, John.
My pleasure.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to honor your time and space. And yeah, thank you so much for being with us today. Just gonna stop the recording down here. Ta, 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 ta. Where is it? Um,
Might be up the top.
uh, yes, top. There it is. Yeah.